Hi, welcome back to another great discussion with Addiction and the Three Principles. Today, Harry Durbisky has asked Keith Blevens to join us today. I'm pretty excited about this conversation we're about to have. I think this is going to be another amazing one. But I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Harry to introduce Keith.
Thanks. This is a very interesting guest that we have here today. About 20 years ago, I worked with Keith. We went into a native reserve together, and in that time, I really got to know him what he was like back then. And the first thing I noticed was everybody liked him. He's a really nice guy, and his wife even liked him. That really shows a lot. And the other thing that I noticed was he was so easy to ask questions to, and his answers. Keith, in my mind, his speciality is he works very well with small groups or one-to-one, and his answers are very clear, and they really lead you to further questions within yourself. So when I was with Keith for 6 months with the Indian Reserve, he had an impact on two people in my mind in that time. The first was a native lady who had a suicide son, and she immediately got this thought to feeling insight that changed her life and actually propelled her until she died recently. And she always had tremendous gratitude for what Keith had shown her. And it was her dream that she would be able to share some of that with some of her people. And we pursued that further on ourselves. And the other person that he really helped was myself, because I really didn't know much about the psychological aspect of life. I was strictly a person who was relating to the spiritual side of the principles. And Keith really connected those two worlds to me. And I'm hoping he'll talk a little bit about that connection between the spiritual and psychological, by the way, Keith. I think that's an important type of topic. So, hi, Janisha, nice to see you. And so we're in for a treat. I'm not going to introduce too much more, but Keith is very, very clear and succinct in how he explains questions. And that gives us an opportunity. He's a psychologist, and he's also one of the early psychologists who came in and was tutored and mentored by Sid. And Sid had a tremendous amount of respect for Keith. He let me know that quite a few times. And so that's as big an honor as you can go. I mean, I was Sid's friend, so that was his one drawback, I guess. But so anyway, Keith, why don't you take it off and just go wherever you want to go with the discussion in relation, and then there'll be questions and so on, and we'll see where it goes.
Sounds great. Thank you both. Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Greg. And thank you all for coming, being here. It's a pleasure to see you. I know many faces that I'm looking at here are near and dear to me, so it's a pleasure to be speaking to you, and it's a pleasure to see those that I haven't had the chance to talk with or share with. So thank you all very, very much. The thing that I wanted to begin with is the three principles that Sydney Banks discovered now in 1973. I'm sorry, he uncovered. He always insisted to say that he found them or uncovered them. He didn't create them. They weren't something that were he didn't claim any discovery. It wasn't an idea. He always insisted that it was a fact, that these principles were facts. And I wanted to mention that something that pertains to particularly the addictions field, Bill Wilson, as you all know, or may know, that he was the co-founder of AA, and he always considered a man that he never met, but an author in the in the world of psychology that I talked to Sid about, and that was William James. And Bill Wilson always considered William James to be a co-founder of AA. He said without William James, he was profoundly impacted by the writings of William James. And I got to talk to Sid quite a bit about William James, and he mentions, Sidney Banks mentions William James on his website, sydneybanks.org. He mentions me and William James, the only two psychologists that he mentions on his site. So it was interesting to be in that conversation with Sid. And William James said, famously to me, that this is one of his quotes: "The truth is that psychology is yet seeking her first principles." Well, as you know, that was in 1892 that he said that. And so then 1973 would be, I don't know,
81, Keith. For the mathematically limited, 81.
Yeah, so 81 years later, this welder has this phenomenal enlightenment experience and discovers, and he says, he gave us a book. He gave us his last writings before he passed away, gave it to me, I should say. And on one of the pages of he said, that was the day of his experience. That was the day that I found what I found that day. I'm quoting from the book, which no one has seen yet. That was the day. I'm sorry. Let me see. That was the day.
Is this from your book, Keith?
This is from the book that Sid gave me, that I'm writing concurrent with him. Part of it is he had the idea. Sid had the idea to present it as an interview. So he started off with saying, you could ask me these questions, and then here's my answer. You could ask me these questions, here's my answer. So that's the way he framed up his last work that he gave to me. And when he was talking about, well, actually, I'll just read a couple of paragraphs here, if you don't mind. Get a moment.
Oh no, get it on. Yes.
In the fall of this is Sidney Banks writing. In the fall of 1973, I had an enlightening experience and realized the existence of a world that very few people know exists. From that moment on, I walked into a world that is invisible to the naked eye. So powerful was my experience, all the negative feelings and sadnesses that had plagued me for 42 years vanished like the mist in the morning sun. This was the day I realized all my sadness and negative feelings were all created from my own thinking. I had freed myself from all my past negative experiences. At that moment, I knew deep in my heart, if anyone could realize for a fact that we live in a world of thought, they too would find the happiness they were searching for. What I found that day was so simple, yet so powerful, it boggles the mind. I found the three principles that are the missing link: psychology, the mental sciences, psychiatry, and the whole world has long been searching for. I knew instantly this answer could heal millions of people who were suffering needlessly. So, such an uncovering, and such an unlikely person in a way, but who knows how greatness comes to a person? You know, I certainly don't. I don't think Sid had ever had any notions that he did anything to deserve it or manufacture it or create it. It just dawned on him, and that's the way he always talked about it. And so these principles dawning on Sidney Banks that were predicted in an interesting sort of way by William James 81 years earlier. William James said psychology has no principles. And then he said, but when they come, he knew that psychology had to be a natural science like chemistry or physics, but we had no science of the mind, which is what he called, what he defined psychology as, the science of mental life, which I think is a beautiful definition. And he said, when those principles come, and come they someday surely will, it will be the greatest single discovery in the history of humankind, because it will mean mental health for the world. And he didn't know, he had no idea what those principles were. And that's one of the things that struck Sid when I spoke to him about William James and talked to him. He had, he didn't know who he was. And he was struck by the fact that he knew he didn't know. And here was the greatest, they consider William James the father of American psychology. So he's a preeminent author, had all kinds of awards just in literature, philosophy, religious studies. He wrote the famous book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, which in a way was kind of a chronicle of people who had experiences like Sid's. And he respected those so much. He said those should be the centerpiece of psychological study and research. That was the highest form that psychology should be preeminently interested in Sid Banks' experience, which of course has been not the case. But James declared that. And so when I spoke to Sid about James, he put it on his website, which is going to remain up forever, evidently. And he also mentioned him in the audio tape Attitude. He talks about William James. So I was really excited to talk to Sid about this and to kind of begin to bring a historical importance. And I knew Sid knew the importance, but I shared with him the importance of what he had articulated and that it had been prophesized by William James. And again, Bill Wilson, who was kind of in between those two figures, considered William James a co-founder of AA. So, and as you probably know, but what started the AA movement was a profound spiritual experience that Bill Wilson had, where he said, a great wind blew through me. And he said, I knew this must be the God of the preachers. That was his way of describing what happened to him. So 81 years later, after James wrote that, this happened to Sid, and I was the second psychologist really to stumble into Sid and to begin my journey and my own career, which was a couple of years out of graduate school. So all that is to say, these three principles, as Harry alluded to earlier, conjoin or link the spiritual to the psychological. They make for a whole formula of principles, and without that, James knew that we don't have the complete series. He said, I don't even know the terms that the principles would assume if we had them. So he didn't know there were three. He didn't know what they were termed. He didn't know how to describe them. All that came with Sidney Banks. But as you all, I think all of us in this call can appreciate the profundity the absolute depth and dimension of Sydney Banks' insight or enlightenment insight, he saw the other half of the formula. So he completed the formula, and he said later, he wrote in Missing Link, he said, if you just have half a formula, you have a cosmic lie. And so the cosmic lie of that humanity has been under the burden of or suffering of is this not knowing this missing link. And that's what we're here to to reflect on. So the principles are the spiritual foundation, but they're worded not as they're worded as in psychological terms: mind, consciousness, thought. And that marriage that Sid saw and articulated for all of the rest of his life is something we're all just coming to more fully and fully appreciate. It forms the first principles of psychological science, first principles of how we work, and something interesting happens when you find something like that. Let me give you an example that may help. Like if you here's a simple one. Before chemistry, you remember being in chemistry class and seeing the periodic table and the periodic table of the elements, hydrogen, oxygen, etc. Those elements are irreducible. They can't be. A compound is water, but water's not an element. It's a compound. Now that wasn't always known up until the time of a man who's known as the father of chemistry, Lavoisier. Lavoisier challenged the thinking that had been inherited from Aristotle that there were 5 elements: water, air, fire, doesn't matter, whatever the other 2 were. Lavoisier said that's not accurate, and he challenged the thinking, much as the principles challenge our thinking, and make us think, well, wait a minute, what is the foundation of mental life, and does it have are these principles the foundation? Which is a challenging, it's a confrontational awakening, a reassessment of our lives. Without that, those elements, those 3 elements of mind, consciousness, and thought, before Sid Banks, we, in effect, most of the history of civilization is a history of compounds. People getting errant thoughts about, well, nationalism is the deal, or whatever it is. There would be the organization of our civilization was founded on, was centered on what I would call false discriminators or false ideas, or things that look like they pertain, religious ideas. Whatever. Sydney Banks declared and cut off these prior misgivings and misunderstandings, and showed us all a simple, profound truth of these elements and how they pertain to our feeling and our reality and our experience intimately, completely, absolutely. They were always present. And without these principles, he said, there's no existence. So he married these principles to not just to our psychological little worries about things, but to existence itself. He said, if you examine these three principles very carefully, you will find that without them, there would be no existence. So he's bringing a new science, a principle-based view, or more than a view, a principle-based science to the nature of our existence and our mental life simultaneously. And it's confrontational because there are things for all of us. We're kind of the generation in this transition, it seems to me, and we've had to recalibrate and reassess and change our minds again and again and again, and get rid of, there's a lot of things that we thought were relevant or pertinent or important that now we have to say, that's not really true. So he brought a truth, and it was like a sword. It broke the state of mind of my mind, and I would venture to say it's probably broken the state of mind of all of you all in some fashion. There's some new order that has appeared to you, and it's forced you to change your mind and change your experience, change your life, not by willpower, but by principled power. The principles themselves do that for us. We don't really take credit for that. We're just finding a new alignment with the order of how we already work that we weren't really aware of or conscious of. And now we've been made aware of, and it's helping us. It's breaking down old patterns of thought that we once held unconsciously. One of the things that Sydney Banks defined the mind as, it's not brain, it's not a thing, it's not a thought. It's a psychic force that acts as a catalyst and turns our thought, whether conscious or unconscious, into the reality we now see. So all of us, all the time, are in a reality, and it's being turned in. Our thought is being conscious or unconscious. Our thought is being turned into this experience of our lives. We're using these principles to experience our lives. Without that, we don't have life experience. So by establishing these principles, it brings us full circle, and it provides a kind of a new harmony and a new contentment, a new connection, a new life, wherein what he describes in our book, he mentions that he said, he tells a story about thought, and he says, in fact, I might even read that too. It seems like let me just read another little section here. There's a lot more being said, but he says,
Can I interject one little thing, Keith? While you were talking, one of the things, when you said principle-based, all of a sudden I realized what Sid was talking about is spiritual-based. That's what principle actually means. Principle is a psychological word, and spiritual-based is, I guess, a different type of word. But the thing, what Keith is talking about is that not only did Sid uncover the three principles, when I first saw Sid, he emanated this incredible force coming from him that immediately I recognized this man had uncovered something special. I was like William Blake. I did not know what he uncovered, but I could see that this man knew what he was talking about. And that feeling that every time we came in contact with him, Keith, seemed to, that it wasn't just that he knew these three principles, they were alive in him in a way that was not alive in me. And I just loved that.
You know, it's easy to tell. And by the way, it's William James, but there was no doubt that you could see that what he found, you said emanated. It's a good point, but I think the beauty of Sid is that he not only found that for himself, he articulated it into a scientific
the two
framework. You know, and he explained it so that it made it. A lot of people have said to me, "Well, I know someone like that," which then I said, "Well, I never met anyone like Sid. I don't expect to, but ever again." But it wasn't just him. It was what he taught. He taught us all these principles, and he left a legacy that will live on forever. And because those of us who met him, I mean, probably on this call right here, there may be 2 or 3 of us that ever met him, probably, but the principles remain, and so there's a great legacy there that is important for us to all respect, and I know we all do. So I was going to read this part here that says, this is another section. It's been my observation that most people who seek answers seek it here, they seek it there, yet the truth evades them everywhere. At first, after my experience, there was, some of you may know, but people just came by the droves to his house on this little island. And he didn't know how they found out about it. But I mean, there would be people that came from Tibet or gurus and all these psychology people like myself and others, and in common ordinary people. They would hear about it and they would show up, and you had to get to the island by ferry, and there was a late ferry on the weekends. Well, in the morning, there could be 100 people on camping on Sid's yard that were strangers. They just showed up because there was something they knew. They were attracted to. He said to us when we first talked to him, he says something like, "I know you don't know. Many of you have come for different reasons, you think, but really, somewhere along the line, you're attracted to energy, and this energy was that Harry's referring to was so compelling. You knew that you could see that there was something that he had discovered, not uncovered, but then something that was for all of us. It wasn't just him; it was for everybody." So he says, again in our text, at first, after my experience, because people would come in kind of like, "Well, I'm checking you out. I heard about something," and so that he could see that they weren't really there to really absorb. They were there kind of dubiously, and they were they had doubts, which was understandable. He says, at first, after my experience, the way others thought that came to see me was very puzzling. I wondered, what is this enlightenment they are talking about? They seem to have their idea about enlightenment, which he hadn't really put together yet, that their ideas were all wrong. But he was beginning to, because he says, why didn't they know that the true knowledge they sought did not reside in any part of the body? It was mystifying to me why they would travel sometimes thousands of miles to find more knowledge if they were already self-realized, as they often claimed. So he was seeing they didn't really know what he had found. There was a difference. As a matter of fact, Keith, everyone on earth is only one thought away from what they seek. If they can find this one magical thought. Throughout the years, thousands of times, people have challenged me and asked me what this one thought was. With a smile on my face, I would always have to answer, the one thought you seek is the state of no thought. I remember one particular man accused me of talking nonsense, then proceeded to tell the whole group a story of how he was driving down the road, and suddenly he experienced the state of no thought and almost drove off the road. I panicked, he told the group, because I couldn't think. He told me it was the worst experience he had ever had in his life. Oh, really? I asked him. And you say this all happened to you when you were in a state of no thought? Well, it was the thought that I couldn't think rationally, he answered. So, I said, you must have been thinking to create your panic. Were you not? The look on his face was priceless, as he realized he had not been talking about the state of no thought. He didn't say another word. So, and then in the book, there's more questions about that. But the specificity of this, because he explains, I'm not talking about no thought, he says, I'm talking about no intellectual thought. Well, that discernment between intellectual thought, for me, and no thought has been a guiding light of my life ever since. But again, it was nice to see him articulate that in this writing that he gave us. So, because I think a lot of my behavior, and I'm presuming you guys are like me, I know you are, a lot of what I think about is intellectual thought. My beliefs or ideas or things that I value or things that frighten me, yada, 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 yada. But this no thought thing is different. And it's very specific. It's not just a general thing. It's a very precise thing. He called it precise. And I've been interested in that, and I think that the precision of that insight compels us all to commune together, talk about it, and to find out more about it, and to find a way to discriminate between all those other thoughts. There's gazillions of other ones that are that all have are kind of are red herrings, and now we're all learning together. We don't really want any part of it. So I think what he brought a paradigm, brought a definitive clarity, brought a principle-based truth. Now, and I wouldn't separate it, Harry. I wouldn't say psychological versus spiritual. I would say spiritual, psychological. Like he didn't separate spiritual and psychological. He if you read him carefully, he's not really oppositionally characterizing those. He's characterizing, if you characterize psychology as all those other errant thoughts, he's not interested in that. But he was vitally interested and profoundly articulate about this answer will change psychology. But it's not a typical psychological answer. It's a new paradigm. And so it's a new paradigm because it's principles, which William James said, we don't have them. And Sid Banks found them, and here we are to discuss them. So maybe that enough said, and let's open it up for comments or questions or whatever.
Yeah, that was great, Keith. Thank you. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions or comments?
I have a question if no one else has one. Okay. In teaching at a recovery center, the question that I feel is at the heart in their mind, occupying their mind the most, is a question that a guy asked last class. He said, these urges that I have, I feel powerless against them. I just wondering, I just would love to hear how you would articulate or explain that to someone who had asked you that particular question.
Yeah. Well, I think we can all relate to that. I don't think an alcoholic or a drug addicted person is fundamentally any different than any of us. But what are those urges? They're just strong, compelling thoughts. For example, a person is, let's say the person's working on a job, and they think, boy, this morning has really gone bad. The boss has been on me, etc. And they have the thought, I'd like to get I wish I had a drink. I can't drink now. But it seems like a little harmless thought, but it's an urge. He has it again at 2:00, and then 5 of them at 3, and then 15 at 5. Well, by 6, he's at the bar. Now that's just the. We're going to have strong urges. We're going to have strong negative thoughts. We're going to have strong. All of us do. Sid Banks would have strong negative thoughts. He confessed those. So it's not a matter of whether they occur, but do you understand them? If you understand them, those strong feelings as thought, at some point you'll realize, oh, that's what there's a connection, a precise connection of that will take you out of that dynamic of rumination and wanting and coming back to it and being compelled by it, and take you out. It'll break that habit, that chain, and you'll realize where that feeling is coming from. It's coming from thought. It's not coming from that you need a drink. It's coming from the thought that you need a drink to feel better. And that breaks the habit. And it breaks the compelling nature of addiction over and over and over and over again. And that's how people recover. They see that they're not at the mercy of their thought created feeling. They understand where that feeling is coming from. If you understand where your feeling is coming from, you will be less a patsy for your compelling urges. And now, it sounds like a little thing, but it's a really big thing. That separation between thought and feeling, we do it all the time, but it's not true. And there's a link between your thought and feeling. And every time you see, oh, I know why I'm feeling this way, I'm thinking. This is coming from my thinking. And you really see that insightfully, you will be helped. And it will restore sanity to a driven, fearful, needy psychology that you're suffering from.
Could I say something in addition to what you just said, Keith?
Sure.
Harry? Hi, this is Bill Bailey here. In my work with addicts and alcoholics, this question that you raised, Harry, is probably the most popular question. What about the urges? What about the thoughts that come into my head? And what people in 12-step programs are taught is that we're powerless over alcohol, over pot, over whatever. And what I say that I think really helps them a lot is that we are powerless over the thoughts that come into our head. You know, once it's in your head, it's too late. You can't stop a thought before it happens. And so in that sense, we have no control over the thoughts that come into our mind. But we're absolutely, and this is the free will to me, is that with the understanding that Sid brought to the world about the connection between thought and feeling, every time we have a thought, we get a feeling. And that feeling is a way of awakening us, making us conscious of the fact of thought in the moment. And once we see that it's my thinking that's creating the feeling rather than what I'm thinking about, the alcohol, the pot, the sex, it's the thought that's giving me the feeling, not that. It like breaks the connection. It unplugs from our addiction to that cycle of thought. And that's how we break that habit. But forever, people who are addicted will have the same thoughts. I have the same thoughts I had when I met Sydney Banks, 37 years ago. I still have those habitual thinking patterns. But I have a psychological immunity, in a sense, built into me because of to the degree to which I understand this paradigm of the scientific and spiritual paradigm of the human experience. So that really helps people, because otherwise, if you're in the cognitive world, you're trying to control your thinking, or you are disempowered to see that you actually have absolute power, in the sense that you are not your thinking. Go figure. You are not your habits. You are that which is a witness to that, which can be aware of that. And to me, that's when people truly experience the freedom from addiction, is seeing that connection. And that's, to me, when I met Sid, because I worked in the addiction field prior to that for about 8 years, I thought, this is the missing link. This is the missing link in treatment, and it's proven itself out over the last many, many decades now. So many treatment centers and addicts all over the world have been healed by these principles. So anyway,
and one of the things that both of you are alluding to, for me, what you're talking about, there has to be an insight, a spiritual psychological insight to see that. I actually mentally understand that perfectly, but in putting it in action, it seems like sometimes my mind overpowers me in a negative direction, and then all of a sudden a spiritual insight comes, and that's what stops the urge, or the power of the urge, and brings the understanding that, oh, hey, I'm free.
That's a good point. It's a really good point. And of course, we all want to remember that it's not well, back to what he said about a thought. It's not intellectual thoughts. So you can say this, someone can say, oh yeah, I know, I'm feeling my thinking, and it's not an insight. Sid said this once, which was very clarifying for me. He said an insight is when the ego collapses on a particular subject. And he talked about objects. We form objects in our mind that don't look like thought, that aren't just in our present day reality objects, but what you just said to me hurt my feeling, but also objects thought objectified, which can haunt us, like that urge you're talking about. That's thought too, and understanding that it's too late to not have that thought. But you're right, Harry. Insightfully, when you see, oh, that's that compelling feeling I'm having, insightfully, then that really you have to have a high standard for what will really help you. You've got to find something that's really true, not just kind of true or you think is true, but you're not heart and soul behind it. It has to be heartfelt, insightfully seen, it permeates you, it helps you insightfully, and that will collapse your outside thinking, and you will see, that was a thought. Boy, it was a big one. It was a sneaky one. It had a lot of power to it, but that's really what it was. And there's that freedom that you're talking about, which is so incredible.
And one profound thing that happened for me was when I saw that when I had those urges and those thoughts, it wasn't when, like if I had an urge for a drink, let's say, it wasn't when I put the drink in my body that I started to feel better. It was when I made the decision to drink. There's a big difference there. And a lot of the people I work with, when I point that out to them, they really look at it, they see it, and it changes everything.
Yeah.
Because if I can make that decision to go have a drink and feel better before I even have that drink, then I can make a different decision and still feel better.
Yeah. And it has to be thought that's you're dealing with, not the liquid.
Right.
You know? and then you've really got something powerful for yourself.
May I come in there?
Absolutely.
Hi, thanks, Keith. I really enjoyed hearing you talk. I met you about 5 years ago at the Tikkun conference in London.
Oh, yes, okay.
And I enjoyed hearing you then as well. Something you said, a couple of points that you said that really spoke to me. The first one was how what Sydney uncovered was the joining of spiritual and psychological. And when I read Joe's book, The Serenity Principle, it really gave me a lot of hope. You know, it says in the big book, I'm coming from a 12-step background, and it says in the big book that we believe that God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free. And happiness, joy, and freedom was the last thing that I was finding. I was getting completely wrapped up in an endless cycle of written work and the next sponsor and the next meeting and the next, and I was piling huge amounts of thought on the original urges and habits that had brought me into the 12-step program in the first place. And when I read his book, The Serenity Principle, it just gave me a brand new insight into, the process and the inside out, that diagram that you've got behind you. It absolutely freed me up, and it's a scary time for me, really, because I'm not yet ready to leave my big book behind, On the contrary, the missing link is exactly the way that exactly the words that I'd used to describe what the three principles understanding is giving me. It fills in so many of the cracks. On a previous webinar, I heard someone talking. I can't remember if it was Amy Johnson or someone else speaking about how she believes if Bill W. was around now, he'd be all over these three principles, because it's such a beautiful, infinitely simple way of describing what every single human being is experiencing, how we are experiencing life. If any of the three elements is missing, then we're simply not experiencing life second by second. But it is a scary concept, you know, to like what you want and leave the rest, and to kind of, I don't know, it's difficult. I'm trying not to think about it too much. I'm trying to just stop thinking as much, and you know, let the process do what it does. And yeah, I'm extremely grateful for this understanding. I just actually I'm finishing Amy Johnson's book, The Little Book of Big Change, which is so beautifully marrying together the neuroscience and the spiritual principles that we're discussing. And it's just wonderful stuff. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you. And if a couple of things that I would care to mention, the idea that Bill Wilson would be all over this, which I think you would. I think William James would be too, because of the fact, again, he knew there was no principles. And I think, so I don't think the principles negate other things that you might find helpful, but they do say something about, you mentioned about scariness and being scared, because there's a logic about the way we feel, that we're feeling, that all feelings, it's a very logical statement, all feelings, whether positive or negative, derive and come alive via thought. That thought in the moment, that's a very logical truth, and truth is logical. But I read something recently that really, that I just wanted to say, I don't know whether it'll matter or not, but that is, if you're afraid of something that's true, then it's never the whole truth that you even have an inkling of. And that really takes the fear out. Like it does something for you to think again, like what is it I could possibly be afraid of? You know, I think Sid Banks brought something about insecurity and fear that is really, really important and new and beyond where we've been. That is profoundly stilling and centering for all of us. Famously to me, he says to someone, or some, right, what kind of started on this domino of these 3 days of enlightenment experience was, you're not insecure, you just think you're insecure, said by someone else. And Sid heard it, and he couldn't, he said it was like hitting him over the head with a hammer. It was just, whoa, and so he saw that all the world's insecurity was thought. And I think that quote, if you have any piece of fear in there, that you don't have an inkling of what the whole truth is, that's like, okay, well, wait a minute, let me take another look again and see. It kind of challenges us all to live less fearfully, or to catch on to why would we be fearful? Well, there must be an outside in component in there. There must be something that we don't think is thought, that we think is something else, and it could create an object, and that frightens us. But that's how that process happens. So thank you for saying that. Appreciate it.
I think you defined an urge in a different way. It does, with what you're talking about, it did bring a little more understanding, because it does appear to be the whole world at that moment, that urge. And what you're talking about it from the perspective that there's a little bit of room on the sides of what you're looking at, it would obviously allow you to click into your own common sense again, and so on. That's actually quite, that's for me, that was insightful. Thanks, Keith.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Anybody else?
Yeah, I have a question. I was just thinking, we have instincts. So some of the things people get scared of aren't really, they're in a way irrational, because, it's actually more scary to take, crossing the street is more dangerous than, or is more realistically dangerous than getting mugged. But we're afraid of getting mugged, but we're not afraid of going over the street. So how does instinct play into this? My experience with the principles, I went to Salt Spring Island last year, summer school, and what I found was true, what you said before, was that I got quieter and quieter and quieter. I almost had this experience of not being able to think. and really not just, it was enough. Yeah, there was nothing to add. So I don't know, but I just felt like asking the instinct question anyway. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And for me, it just helps me, by the way, and it should all help. It may help you all, or it may help you when you talk to other people. There are, I think instincts, for me, instinct is, it seems like it's one of those little things off to the side. It seems like, yeah, okay, instinct, yeah, oh, yeah, we have instinct, and then there's not instinct. There's a little, there's what I call a splitting, and the splitting is a way to innocently kind of complicate what we're all dealing with. And so there's a lot of split thoughts and more important thoughts and less important thoughts, more better this and not that, or higher this and lower that. And so all those things look like they're pertinent and relevant, and they're all symptoms of splitting. So when I'm working with people now, and when you just said this, so this is what prompts me to say what I'm going to say. What I'm saying is that if it helps me to know if I split, I've made a mistake. I've done something to take. Let's see if I can. Yeah, here I am. Separate out a type of thought, a type of feeling, a risky, a pure instinct, and then less impure. Or now Sid mentioned this once. He said, if you have a flat tire and you have to cross a freeway and you get insecure, well, that's alerting you to the danger at hand. But as soon as you cross that street, it ought to go away. Insecurity is not it makes you hyper alert, but it doesn't. The fact is we live in a lot of insecurity. People just live frightened, a little apprehensive. Those are the levels of unconscious thought that are being felt by me and by you and by the world, that are still thought. But if we don't identify them, we just live with them, and they're thought too. So those the unconscious thoughts being made, the mind takes those too and brings them into your experience. So there's no the mind's not picking and choosing. The mind's not living in a time-based experience. It's bringing forth what we think. But that action is really our liberation. Misunderstood, it becomes our prison. But understood, it becomes our liberation. So I think there's a lot of things that we, I've been taught a lot of differences, but like someone mentioned the other day I was working with, they said, I've always known that all the differences and distinctions that they were all man-made. They're not really God-made. God didn't really, God's everything. And so that's how he put it. So I thought, yeah, that kind of puts it into a perspective. So I don't get into parsing so much about right, wrong, good, bad. I can see the principles are deeper than any such limitation. They're holistic. And as such, it spiritualizes everything. Everything is, like Sid said, it's the entire universe is one divine thought. It's one consciousness. Well, that's a different paradigm. And you just glimpse that, and it kind of helps allay the parsing and the splitting. And because as soon as you split, you have to create something to do. And one of the things that really was clear to all of us, that Matt said, that he was not talking about doing the principles ever. So he was talking about this pre-existing truth, but it wasn't up to us to figure it out and do it, because he would always caution us. He says, because we were splitting. There was a whole lot of splitting going on, you might say. And I'm glad I'm getting a little better sense about it, so I can give it up whenever I get into it. And if you guys can do that, you'll really find a deeper peace and a discernment without judgment.
May I say, Keith, that I can feel it in my body what you're saying. I experience it as a feeling of contentment, and it's very fulfilling. And I just felt the whole argument dissolving.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And what you said about the spiritual was, for me, I've heard that said many times, but I think you're pinpointing it really well. So thank you. Beautiful.
You're welcome. With our this is just there's another the way we often teach people, like in a sense, this doesn't, and I'm giving this very short shrift because we don't really have time to go into all the detail here. But when we make something up to be, like I said, Sid said, an insight is when the ego collapses on a particular object. So when we make objects like a split, oh yeah, wait, oh, I gotta have. Oh, yeah, it's better to have that than this. And so there's a dilemma, and that dilemma has it disappears when you put the same thing on both sides. So a lot of the times when I begin working with people, like they'll complain about something, like one of these things, I don't know if you can see them here, but is a manipulative friend. So I had someone who was talking about the friend was manipulative. And so he was outside in, you might say. He was thinking about the object, this manipulative friend, and the pain he was causing him, the hurt, the concern, etc. So when he, you never see the inside out. The outside in is blind to the inside out. It can't really fathom it. When we put it over here, he was like, so you put the same thing on both sides? I says, yeah. Oh. Well, right away, he started to reflect and get the idea that, oh, my feeling can't come from my friend, my manipulative friend. My feeling is coming from my use of thought about object called manipulative friend. Aha. That right there really, it did for him what it just did for you. Intuitive was over here. What about intuitive? Well, we put it on both sides. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's not really, that's kind of I don't need to chase that, the pertinence or relevance of that criteria. That's not really going to lead me toward further understanding. It's just going to lead me to keep dividing things up on the intuitive, not intuitive, false domain.
I have one question, more short one. I think everyone here would be interested in hearing when does the book come out?
Well, we're kind of waiting, like I'm not sure. Sometime in the future, but we've waited on it because we wanted to get more momentum behind it and more because a lot of people have written books about inside out and outside in, and they haven't really understood what we're meaning by a principle-based experience and there is no non-principle based experience. So outside in, people have really misunderstood this line and called it, well, it's circumstances. It's just outside circumstances. Well, it's not outside. It's not just outside circumstances, because it's I can think about a situation or circumstance in my mind and objectify it, and it's not really happening. It may never happen, or maybe it's already happened, but it seems like it's an entity that I'm thinking about and strategizing in terms of. Well, that's not just circumstances, that's thought. And most of what we have outside in is intellectualized thought. It's not really true. Just like intuitive. You put that over here. Oh yeah, intuitive. I got to be, as soon as you make intuitive be a god or something you want, then you got, oh, I don't know if I was being intuitive. You got the opposite. There is no opposite reality of the principles. It only works one way. It only ever will work one way, and we're all just coming to terms with the truth of it, and that will eliminate false discriminators or other images. But this line is not. It's principle based versus nothing. That's why this other diagram says it maybe a little better. We have a lot of programs that we've made on this distinction in that we've recorded on 3principlesparadigm.com that people can look at and enjoy or learn from. It's really helped us to be more specific and rigorous, which has made a big difference for me in terms of my ability to teach.
One of the observations, I don't know if this is true, Keith, but when Linda wrote her Beyond Belief book, it was a historical record, was said, of a period of time that everybody was curious about. And on one level, your book sounds like it's the same thing, except the progression now into the psychologist with questions asked of Sid, and he explaining it, and the transition from just the salt spring feeling to the psychological and the world feeling that he was talking about.
Exactly. Yeah, I really like. In fact, excuse me, I'll disappear for a second, but yeah, that little book is. I didn't have to go far to get a hold of it. It's right here, Beyond Beliefs, because you're right. There's a lot of really important things, because this is the territory of beliefs, and there's a multiplicity of beliefs, as we all know, but there's only one. Seeing that one thought, how that works, it calms all those. A belief is not a fact. It's a belief. It's a mind-made, man-made concept, and he says that very, very well. We all contaminate our minds in a different way according to our own beliefs. But I think it's important to be able to honestly characterize that and speak to it, because those beliefs, if they go undetected, they're like little things. When people listen to us, they have a little of this and a little of this and a little of that in there, and it makes their comprehension of the simplicity and the power and the beauty of the principles more vague, kind of iffy. And so, I'll ask people to, they'll say things, well, like Chris's thing about intuition. I'll say, well, let's talk about that for a minute. So to help them see, there's, in our language, we have, in a way, a kind of a recklessness, a kind of a whatever, ballpark. We have a sort of way of, like Sid was not reckless in his vocalizations. He was, some prominent teacher told me once, he said, Sid Banks is by far the most rigorous person I've ever heard speak. And at the time, it kind of shocked me, because I thought, really? Like, he seems sort of philosophical and vague. He says, no, he's not vague. You're the one that's vague. You're bringing the vague in, pal. And I thought, really, that was really helpful for me, because I was kind of a lazy thinker. And I think most people are. They're they don't really they're not very rigorous. But I think the principles, again, and as a teacher of the principles, the rigor has been, it's kind of fuzzy. And I would like to see the rigor become more prominent, and because I think it will help. Sid said this is precise, and he wasn't kidding. It is, the principles are very precise. There's a lot they aren't. And it ought to be, we could share that and talk about it and come to a greater understanding of what it is and what it isn't.
Keith, I really would love to have you on a second time, because I really feel like we've reached people feel full right now, in my opinion. And I would love for you to come on another time, and we could go again a little bit deeper into what you just discussed and so on. I think we've really covered a lot of ground, and the way you've explained it. And I think a lot. Would you be open to that?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Okay, maybe I'll discuss with you what would be a good time.
Okay.
And I know, I really feel that people are not only full, but they've really gotten a tremendous amount.
That's great.
Well.
And again, on our site, there are programs where we go more in depth.
What does that say it again, please, Keith?
Three principles paradigm.
Okay, I didn't know about that.
Yeah, Three Principles Paradigm. We've got some beautiful, simple little articles on there. It's very clean. It's very, people tell us that. They always remark about the simplicity. And so it's, we're proud of, we just started a website about 2 months ago. So it's kind of, it's sort of a new era, but we're very happy with what we've done with it.
If you need to splice anything from what we talk about, just let me know and I'll send it to you. If you like something that that would articulate something that you were talking about, I would be more than happy to splice it for you.
I don't know. I don't quite know what splice it meaning.
Well, just take a little piece out of like this talk and the next talk. If there was a piece that you like,
we can handle that kind of stuff a little bit later. So let's. Thank you so much, Keith. This was awesome.
Okay. Thank you all very, very much.
Yeah, what a wonderful thing. This is, I can't imagine a better way to end our first year of these webinars. And it's it's hard to believe it's been a year already. So we didn't really know what to expect when we started this, if there'd really be much of a response. We ended up having about 37 people show up today. So I think that's one of our highest shows so far live. But I mean, by far the biggest reach of this is on YouTube. You know, we're reaching a lot of people, so I really believe that what you shared today is going to help a tremendous amount of people. And I wouldn't be surprised if if you quickly become one of the highest hitting, highest viewed recordings that we have. So this will be available on YouTube. We did have a question about watching a replay. The channel is called Hope for Addiction, using the Three Principles. So if you search for that, it has all of our recordings on there. And this will be up within about an hour after we finish here. So thank you again, Keith, so much. I look forward to bringing you back on to get a little deeper into the single paradigm. I think I like that approach to explaining this. It's really simple and straightforward. I really enjoy it. I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody so people can say goodbye and thank you, and everybody have a great day.
Thanks.